Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast which asks the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George, and today we're asking, how do you start a movement? Hello and thank you so much for downloading and listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And today we're talking about how to start a movement. And I'm joined by someone who I'm always happy to follow in her footsteps, Lizzie Elston. How are you, Lizzie?
Come with me, George. I'm very well. I'm excited on two counts, actually. First of all, it's my first episode of Series 5. So we're into Series 5. Absolutely brilliant. So this is obviously going to be a fantastic episode, and we've got more to come. So that's on one count. And the other count, George, I have to say, I'm feeling a little bit starstruck, actually, because I've always been in awe of people who can take an idea and really drive it, particularly when there's something, really sort of purposeful or meaningful about it. And we'll introduce in a moment, obviously, our two incredible guests, but I'm particularly excited to be joined by them today. Can't wait to start chatting.
And I'm really excited to get stuck into this week's episode, which is all about movements. And, movements are really what's made the world a better place over the course of history. We might remember from our school days learning about the civil rights movement in America, universal suffrage, or more recently, tackling climate change. I think it's really important just to sort of, understand how we came about starting a movement, how you drive it forward, and how you build that momentum in order to create a more equal society. I think there's certainly a limit to how much we can talk about it, Lizzie, but who have we got in the studio today to chat us through and share their expertise?
So first of all, we are joined by Peter Holbrook, CBE. So Peter is the CEO of Social Enterprise UK, the national trade body which works to promote social enterprise as a model for changing both business and society. Peter has established, developed and supported hundreds of social enterprises over his career, as well as advised government task forces in the UK and overseas. Welcome, Peter.
Hello, it's lovely to be with you today.
I wish people could see Peter's dynamic hello just then. Fantastic. Great to have you here. And also delighted to welcome Kalvinder Dhillon. Kalvinder is a vice chair and tax partner at Deloitte. She has worked with consumer businesses and TMT clients for 25 years, both in the US and the UK. Kalvinder also plays a significant role in supporting some of our key societal initiatives, such as the Change the Race Ratio campaign or our Open for Business partnership. Welcome, Kalvinder.
Hey, Lizzie, how are you? I'm
Very
just
well.
starstruck by having Peter here, actually.
We're all starstruck. So we always start our podcasts with an icebreaker. And this is no exception. And it's just popped into my chat here. And the question is this: what did you want to be when you were little? What a great question. Who would like to kick off?
I don't think podcast host is allowed, or probably, but I mean, I'll dive in there. I was always fairly nuts about dinosaurs, so a paleontologist, I think. Well, maybe I might still grow up to be a paleontologist. Who knows? But that's my main ambition. That certainly was when I was 5. Yeah.
Peter, what about you?
Well, it doesn't sound very cool, but I very clearly remember telling everybody that I wanted to be Prime Minister. And I think the closer I've got to politics, the less I wanted to achieve that ambition. But it was certainly a very, very clear and the earliest kind of professional ambition that I can remember having.
Well, if you do ever run, you'll have my vote.
Yeah, you haven't heard what I've got to say yet.
Well, that's true. Maybe we'll wait till after the podcast. What about you, Kalvinder?
Well, I definitely can't say it was a Deloitte partner, so I'm sorry to disappoint everybody who's listening. It was a neurologist. I was always fascinated by the brain, and I still am.
Amazing. It's amazing. Think about sliding doors. What could have been?
Yeah.
How about you, Lizzie?
Well, it was a couple of things. I wanted to be a pianist and I wanted to be a nurse. And so I was going to be a piano playing nurse. And it was until the desire to become a Blue Peter presenter kicked in. So none of those have quite been realised, but this is a close fourth, I guess.
There's still time. There's still time to combine all those skills.
Yeah.
Right. I think let's get stuck into this week's big question, which is how do you start a movement? And I think Peter and Kalvinder is great. We've heard a bit of a bio from you two, but I think it'll be great to hear it from your own mouths, if that's all right. So, Peter, perhaps could you kind of give us a bit of an overview of history to date, and so that we can help understand, why you care about what you do.
Yeah, I guess. First of all, I'm not really sure that I've ever started a true movement. I still hold that ambition dear. But I've been involved in, I think, social justice and politics and business all my life, really. I was brought up in a family that was actively involved in and around its community. I was born in Mitcham in South London, which is a fairly kind of poor community and still is to this day. And there was, there is injustice all around us, right? That happens in your neighborhood, on your street, particularly as a kid growing up in school. And I just became, I think, motivated, and probably my parents enabled that motivation to take root, really, and to believe that I could change things, even small things, when I was growing up. And I think that's what led me to want to become Prime Minister. The reality of, your teenage years and adolescent years kicks in, and you have other priorities over that period, for sure. But then when I think I emerged, in a fairly conventional kind of job, working in retail when I was 15 and 16, and then I got offered management training by Marks and Sparks, and I did a bit of that. But at some point, I realised actually that there was still that flame alive in me around social change, around social justice, and that flame kind of took hold, and it meant that I sadly left Marks and Spencer's behind to pursue kind of bigger issues that I wanted to contribute towards. And at the time, this was in the 1980s, my first real ambition was to get stuck in actually to climate change and environmental injustice. And one thing led to another. From Greenpeace, I went into Oxfam, always actually taking the management training I'd got at Marks and Spencer's with me, because back in the day, it was world class. I'm sure it still is, but I had practical experience of it being world class. And I was able to take those principles of management and business into social change. And at some point, after doing a bit in the environment and overseas development, I kind of discovered social enterprise and thought all my dreams have come true. This really does merge my thirst for social justice, but also my passion and interest for business.
That's really interesting. We're definitely going to explore and unpick some of that journey, I think, Peter. But before we do that, Kalvinder, could you perhaps talk a bit about your career to date and how you came to follow the causes that you do?
Sure. Most of my careers, actually all of it's pretty much been at Deloitte, but, really always had a very activist mindset, and then trying to have an activist mindset, but in the context of what we do and bringing that together. So always on the picket lines, university, quite rebellious. Some would argue still quite rebellious at Deloitte for different reasons. But as I think I grew in my career, I always felt that we have a bigger place in society and a lot to contribute, that we should do so in a focused and challenged way. And particularly over the last few years, as I became more senior in the organization, I felt this real need in myself, as well as for us as a brand, to play a bigger role in society, given the inequity that exists in the world and in the communities that we function. So, even during the COVID crisis, helped with, aged individuals, pulled together a team of people to look at social care for our elderly that have been forgotten. So I think those things are important to me. And I guess I'm very fortunate to be an organization that allows me to do some of those things, but also at this point in my career, how do we use the platform that we have to do greater good in society, I think is a key focus for me.
Was hearing you talk about your backgrounds, was there a sort of a specific point for either of you where you sort of really became aware of the change you wanted to make in the world? Anything in particular that sort of triggered your desires?
Well, if I could go first, because I suppose what really struck me actually as a young man growing up in the 1980s was my sexuality. I'm a gay man, and it was a very, very hostile environment in which I had to come to terms with that. And I think recognizing that as a consequence of my sexuality, I couldn't probably pursue a career in politics and become Prime Minister, actually. That was my thinking at the time. It was a time of Section 28. It couldn't be taught in schools. There was a societal intolerance to the LGBT community at that time. Was my first experience of real injustice, actually. And that manifested itself in, kind of episodes of bullying at school. And, you can imagine, right? And so it gave me direct and personal experience. And I'm sure, the same is true of Kalvinder. Direct and personal experience of social injustice, can light a fire in your belly, actually. And I wasn't ready to come out at that time. But what it did was expose me to other forms of injustice. And I can remember, not ready to come out, but deciding to, surround myself with the anti-apartheid movement, which was also a big issue at that time, and other social causes, not just, social issues, but also environmental issues. And I became, an activist. A bit like Kalvinder. If there was a picket line, I'd be there. And I'm sure we may have even met each other before, Kalvinder.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think very similar to Peter. I think, who we become is really defined by our growing up. So a bit like Peter, grew up in Coventry in a period where, the manufacturing industry was under constant change, third generation immigrant family. A bit like Peter, as a gay Indian woman in a society where, you're constantly challenged on many fronts. It becomes a part of your life. And I think you then have a responsibility to make it better for those that come after you. I think I just came out on the podcast, by the way, but that's okay. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Peter.
Well, congratulations, Kalvinder. I'm glad to have been here to witness.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter. I felt the pressure right there. But I think all those experiences define who we are and how we want to change the world, because it does need changing, and we have a responsibility to change it and make it better for those who come after us.
I suppose it's taking that first step is probably, sticking that head above the parapet, as it were, when is probably quite a daunting prospect. Can you talk a bit about that, and how you felt at the time, and whether you thought actually, is this not going to work, or did you just feel that actually you had a responsibility to take a leading foot in some of these movements?
I don't think I was ever daunted by it, because I think change is about being brave enough. So I think the question of being daunted when there is so much injustice and inequity in the world didn't ever strike me. And I was never afraid to challenge, rebel, or look at the world differently. I mean, I think in some ways, maybe my experiences made it more natural for me to do so. So it was never anything that daunted me. I think the daunting bit is how you bring others into the fold to create a much bigger vision than the one that you have yourself. And how do you get buy-in to the changes that you want to make? Because while one individual can have an idea, it definitely takes an army of people to execute it. So I think that's a skill that you learn with experience, from being rebellious at the start to being more consensus-driven and patient. Because I think when you want to change the world's injustices, you have a level of impatience that doesn't sometimes quite work. I don't know what it was like for you, Peter, but I was definitely very impatient in my younger age about the things that I wanted to change.
I still am impatient, to be honest. And I suppose I was confused by the injustice that I saw around me, because it didn't make sense. And I think that interest in further understanding other injustices took me deep into a world of, socio-economic politics. It took me into issues of environment, of business. And this is why I think business is so important in this agenda, because we often talk about society and politics, but we don't really talk about the economy as a driver, perhaps, for some of the injustices that are really, really rooted within society. And I think it's the kind of the interdependence of all those kinds of issues that has really fascinated me, and why I still consider business to have such a powerful role in resolving these injustices and challenges, and why we need a social movement of business responsibility.
So, Peter, on that note of the importance of business being involved, I guess there's so much power that resides now in I mean, always has done, but probably more so now. On the topic of sort of social enterprise, of course, which you're so heavily involved in, what is the business rationale, if you like, around social enterprise? Because it's not just a nice thing to do, is it? This is genuinely, a new way of businesses working and creating value. How would you define sort of a social enterprise versus a private business, for example?
Look, I've worked in private businesses, and both of those private businesses that I kind of earned my stripes with were both family owned, and they were very much values driven businesses. One was Marks and Spencer's when it was a family owned business, and the other was Body Shop International when it was run by Anita and Gordon. And they both had a very kind of moral framework around them. They were both very, very different businesses, but they both absolutely were driven by the family's own personal value set. And I was in both of those companies when they both IPO'd and became PLCs. And I have to say, it wasn't a positive experience on the whole for those working within either of those businesses. One was bought by L'Oreal, which, the Body Shop had been the antithesis of for all of its startup years. And Marks and Spencer's went onto the stock market, and you started to see this kind of erosion of culture and values. And I'm still friends with many, many people within that business. And Lord Stone of Blackheath is a former managing director of M&S, who I worked with back at that time. And we're still very good friends. And we reflect on the change that happened. And I suppose what I started to see is how profit maximization, without getting too into kind of the whole kind of history of economics, but the Milton Friedman doctrine, where shareholder primacy is really the only rule of the game, it just wasn't good enough. How it actually started to fail people that had worked when I was at M&S, that were proudly wearing their 30 and 40-year service badges. They had, a podiatrist upstairs to look after their bunions and cut their toenails. They had a hairdresser on site. Well, it all went, and understandably so. I mean, you think about that now, and it's ridiculous. But that relationship between companies and their employees as real stakeholders engaged and involved in the business, I could see dissipate. And that's why I kind of feared, really, for the future of business, and why I felt, given the environmental pressures that were emerging, given some of the social causes that were emerging, and I've already mentioned apartheid, but certainly civil rights in America hadn't finished at that point. We needed a new relationship between business and society, and business and the environment. And I decided quite naively that I would set up my own business that would work to my own values. And I started to do that before I even knew the term social enterprise. And I was determined to treat all my stakeholders with equal value, and not just my employees and my investors, but my employees, my investors, the community around me, the environment upon which my business was built, managers. I mean, there are a variety of different stakeholders. And I think genuinely what we need to do is shift the system so that the best businesses are recognised as those that create the greatest value for all, rather than the greatest value for the few.
It's really interesting. Peter, earlier made a really important point, which I think, we should hold on to even at Deloitte, the art of being inquisitive, right? And inquisitive beyond the boundaries of what we do just in our day jobs, but wider society, because I think that's really important. And for our people to feel encouraged that their inquisitiveness and the things they raise won't get missed. And in that sense, as odd as it might sound, I think partnerships are like a big family, albeit a very big family. So we can set the tone for the values that we want in a partnership in a very different way to perhaps a corporation. And I think that's encouraging for the next generation that, this is something that they can take forward. And I take, great pride that our young people are actually sharing their views and opinions, and whether that's on climate change or, ethnicity or parity of any kind. And I think we need more people to be inquisitive in the world, because I think if we lose that trait, then we will lose the ability to influence in a much bigger way.
Kalvinder, earlier you made a really good point about the importance of having followers when you do sort of start a movement or do try and change the world, and that is, I'm just thinking back at some of the weddings I went to over the summer, and I was trying to get a conga going, and it doesn't work if no one's willing to join you. But I think I was about 50% success rate there. But when the Proclaimers 500 Miles starts playing, that's all you have to do, really, isn't it? But that's a trivializing a little bit there. But I think, how do you go about finding your fans and building that follower base? Because that's crucial, isn't it? Anyone can have a cause which they want to drive home and an injustice they want to challenge, but if no one else is listening or no one else is connected by that, then it's not going to achieve anything, is it? So how do you find those fans?
So I think it's partly the point of inquisitiveness, but also partly it's the point of, picking the things that you really believe in. Because I think when you really believe in something, so for me, I really believed in change the race ratio, right? The constant focus on ethnicity has been at the boardroom. And that's great that there has been so much focus on boardroom representation, but you actually don't get the candidates for the boardroom unless you start at the exec and the exec -1. So, I felt passionate about the issue, in articulating it to Richard, hopefully he'll agree. That passion was also driven by data, but then also, given the CBI was going to be involved, I knew there were people like Anna Marks who sat on the CBI board. So it's actually looking wider and saying, who do you need to engage to be able to actually influence something? And I think that becomes important. But it also becomes easier if you yourself feel very passionate about something, because then you'll articulate all the right things and you'll do all the right research and you'll be able to involve the right people. I think that becomes quite important. So I think the tie-up with the CBI, with Lord Billamoria being there as the first ever ethnic president, the timing was just right. He was willing, we were willing, and it sort of just moved from there.
And Kalvinder, having looked at the latest Parker Review report into ethnic diversity in UK boards, correct me if I'm wrong, but it says that 37% of FTSE 100 and 69% of FTSE 250 still don't have any ethnic minority representation on their boards. Yeah. So clearly this is, very much there to change.
Yeah, long way to go, but on a good journey, because I think you can't look at the ultimate result. You have to look at the supply chain and the years before on how we prepare people for those roles. So, we do some fantastic work, with BAME on boards. I sit on our board. I clearly remember the moment when I walked into that room, even though I've been with Deloitte all my life. There's a sudden moment when there's a room full of people and you're like, wow, I do look different. I think we need to acknowledge that, people feel differently. So I think all those experiences drove me to this point of really wanting to do something. And I think if you change the race ratio, we have over 120 FTSE 350 clients signed up. We're working through everything that we're going to do in terms of preparing the candidates of the future, but also the psychological safety in the environment, which I think, Peter, you will also understand that they need to operate in to be able to be visible, but also to have the right skills and how we're going to bring that to them. I think those things are all important when you're trying to address a societal issue, which is now a global societal issue, not just UK.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the joys actually of working in social enterprise is the genuine kind of authentic representation and diversity that you see throughout. So, I mean, I've just done a biennial research survey published, and 47% of our leaders in social enterprise are women, and 13% of social enterprises are led by a Black or Asian person. And if you look at disability, if you look at age, whichever way you cut it, you see that social businesses genuinely represent the society in which we live. And that creates, I think, not only a great win for equality, but it actually creates a much more competitive, a much more powerful business. And I think one of the jobs that I try and do here is not just make the moral argument for why businesses need to be more responsible, but making the business argument, the economic argument of why businesses that do embrace their full diversity of society, why it makes them more competitive and more effective at what they're trying to do in the world. And it's such a privilege to be at what I consider to be at the forefront of the future of business. There will come a time when all businesses do reflect society more so than they currently do, and are, recognize their responsibilities to collectively work towards a regenerative economy that doesn't diminish and degrade our environment, and actually, shares and spreads prosperity for the benefit of all humanity, rather than for, a very, very kind of small elite. And it's really exciting when you're in a movement to feel as if you're part of that process of change. Change does mean movement, and movement does mean friction. And actually, I really enjoy the being the naughty boy at times, and pushing people and pushing ideas and philosophies and thoughts that really, potentially stretch them and challenge them. I like being the person in the room that does that, and I'm sure you do too, Kalvinder.
Yeah, I sort of thrive on it. I don't know if I want to say that publicly on a podcast, but I totally agree. And I think there's something there, Peter, which is, equal is the focus on business, but maybe you and I need to team up afterwards, but because the third sector needs to move on some of these things, right? The education system, if we look at charity organizations, the level of diversity in those boardrooms, and the focus they put on the equality on how they contribute to society, I still think needs a shift. So while there's an equal focus on business, certainly with what we're trying to do in change the race ratio, we're also getting the universities and the third sector involved as well. But your point on friction is really well taken. You have to get out of your comfort zone to be prepared to move things. I think that's really important. And be prepared to listen too. Not everyone's going to agree with you, right? But we do want dialogue with those who don't agree with us as well, because dialogue is what creates a joint force.
And I think the critical thing for me, is that social movements are only successful when you create an opportunity for everybody to participate. These cannot be exclusive. And that means people that you might not consider to be necessarily your allies still have to have roots in to contribute, participate, to exchange ideas. Only when you have genuinely inclusive movements do you actually ever create genuine social change.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? Like Change Please. They use 100% of the profits from their award-winning coffee to help people experiencing homelessness. They offer training, employment, and ongoing support with housing, finances, and therapy. Why not sign up to Change Please Coffee Club to receive weekly deliveries of coffee beans, or try out one of their blends? Just head to changeplease.org or check out the show notes. Now back to our topic of the day. And I mean, you've got your message out there, you've started it up, you've got people joining you, you're gaining momentum. I wonder if you have any particular moments along the way, or any sort of milestones that really propelled your movements?
I think there's, all you need is a couple of small wins under your belt. I mean, I remember rebelling at school and organising a student kind of sit-in against my secondary school in Mitcham. And, when we were victorious, I mean, that propelled me to my next, right, what can I do next, right? And at university, I did the same. I was the first of my, family generation to go to university. One of the first things I did was join up to the student societies and start thinking, what could I change on campus? And we changed all sorts of things on campus. And then my football club, AFC Wimbledon, well, it was called Wimbledon Football Club at the time, got bought by a billionaire, moved to Milton Keynes. And I thought, well, we're not having that, right? So we set up our own football club, and everyone said it could never be done. And today, AFC Wimbledon is in the first division. It's got its own ground back at Plough Lane. I mean, the more you learn about what the art of the possible the more it propels you to go, okay, what next? And I just wish I knew what I know now when I was younger.
Yeah. And I don't know what you think, Peter, but, you're always motivated by the energy of other people. Those random emails that people wonder if they should send someone. Actually, some of the emails that I received when we first became one of the founding organizations have changed the race ratio that came from our people were actually some of the motivating moments that I'd had where we're propelled by other people's energies. I think, Peter, you've done this more than me, but I think one of the things for me certainly is that, movements need to be kept alive, right? So the energy can't fade. So you have to ensure that you keep bringing the energy into whatever you're trying to execute and implement, because, the danger is everyone then starts to get busy with the job that they're doing, or the social pressure fades, or the media coverage on a subject fades, and then we fade with it. I think it's sticking with it that is the hardest thing. Starting it, actually, for me, is the easy bit. I think then sticking with it and getting some results is the tougher bit of all of this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the civil rights movement didn't end in the 1960s, right? It continued to this very minute.
Exactly.
I think that's really interesting. And whilst the small wins are a huge propelling factor, minor setbacks are just going to drive the determination even further, aren't they? I suppose. So, to your point, Kalvinder, you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. So you need to make sure that the leadership is listening to people who are coming up with some of these issues as well, to challenge it. And sorry, Peter, you mentioned your research, which I think is the No Going Back State of the Social Enterprise report. I found it really interesting that during the course of the pandemic, I think something like 12,000 social enterprises have emerged, which is absolutely fascinating. And to your point about how important that is for business and the economy, I think those social enterprises, the total number of UK social enterprises is over 100,000 and employing 2 million people, which just shows the importance of some of these movements out there. Do you have any background as to why so many social enterprises have emerged over the last year?
It's a complex answer, and I won't bore you with all the technical elements. But I think people recognise a couple of things. They recognise that the traditional way of doing business might not be fit for the 21st century, and we have to find a way that does business in a more regenerative way, and in a way that doesn't keep on driving this absolutely toxic inequality that we are seeing take hold right across the world, almost in every nation. So there's definitely a generation of young people that are rethinking what it means to be a business. And secondly, I think everybody now is searching for purpose. People want to feel as if their contribution for the short time, particularly in their working lives, has some sort of meaning. And actually, to work for a company that has a social mission or a environmental mission, as opposed to making money for the man, and it normally is a man, it is a liberating experience. And I think it certainly has driven, and I never realised this actually when I embarked on my journey in social enterprise, of how much it would give me back, how much fulfilment it would give me through my life, and how it continues to give me that sense of purpose, contribution, of ongoing learning. It's a very, very, very different way of working. And as you can gather, I'm a big fan of it. And of course, I'm not trying to turn Deloitte's employees into a bunch of social entrepreneurs. But of course, everyone is welcome. This is a growing sector. And I do believe that all businesses will operate in this way, because I think it unlocks the key to productivity. It unlocks the solutions to the challenges we face right here, right today, and will face tomorrow. And I believe it's, of course I do. It's a better way of doing business, and one that can be successful if the system and the ecosystem in which businesses operate can also find ways to kind of propel it to its potential. So yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons why, and consumers, right? I mean, not just employees, but also consumers. We see that even through the pandemic, even through austerity, people that are buying goods and services want to know that their money is making, that their purchase is making a difference. things like the Social Value Act is really seeing that kind of growth in more socialized forms of business. And I'm not, always a purist. Small steps. I'm talking to some very big businesses at the moment, some big PLCs that are talking about how they can become more authentically social and how they can disperse opportunity and prosperity for more people. And they're conversations that I love to have because, as you can imagine, I mean, what better way is there to spend an afternoon than thinking how a business can be more socially useful and impactful?
In terms of, I mean, it's incredibly motivational listening to both of you and so positive and enthusiastic. But clearly you will have come across obstacles and challenges. And I wonder if maybe, Kalvinder, if we go to you, sort of any difficult moments that made you question sort of what you're doing and how you managed to overcome those.
I think there are always difficult movements, right? And the moments when you're doing the kind of work that you want to do, which is outside of what we do in our day jobs, right? Whether that's getting someone's buy-in, or when we got involved with Open for Business, which is a leading LGBT think tank, the number of people sometimes that you have to convince to get on board. But I think, as impatient as Peter and I might be in our execution, that's where you have to stay the course of patience and just believe that what you're doing is right for you as an individual. So I think being authentic to yourself, but also that it matters to the people that you see every day who work for us. And I think Peter's point about the increase in social enterprises is really quite interesting for us, Lizzie, from a talent perspective, right? If we don't give our people purpose, then we won't be able to hire the best talent, is my personal view, right? And I think that's the reason that we're all in this. We're not only in it because we want to fix a society's injustices, but to Peter's point, we're also in it because we want our people to have something more meaningful that they can tie themselves to. And so in those moments, there are always difficult moments. There are always moments when you come home and think, I was going to use a word that you'll have to dupe out, so I'll resist using it. But I think you have to stay the course, but also in that moment, you have to have friends and mentors, right? So for me, that's always been important. The 2 or 3 people at Deloitte I can call up in that moment of frustration and say, hey, how would you go about this? How would you handle this? Or external people who, like Peter, are very involved in these aspects, who you can call and take guidance from, because some of this is new for us as an organization, right? We're trying to build a purpose in a very focused way. So I think the lesson for me is don't give up. We don't give up on our day job. Why should we give up on the injustices of society?
It's to echo what you're saying from Greta Thunberg, who of course everyone knows and is very aware of at the moment with COP26. Yeah. So to that very point, because she was asked in a recent interview, do you ever just think it's all going to get too hard and we should give up if we can't make the target that we're aiming for? And she said, there's always more you can do. So obviously we're trying to keep global temperature rises to below 1.5%, but if that's not possible, then we go for 1.6%. And if that's not possible, we go for 1.7%. But there's always more that can be done. So you're in good company, Kalvinder.
Wow. I should be on that picket line with her outside COP26.
Get to Glasgow.
Come on, Peter. Tonight's flight.
I mean, I thought the thing that I've always met, I've met it for over 35 years of my life, if not more, is the message that that will never happen or that's not possible. And actually, you have to believe it's possible. Otherwise, there's every likelihood that you might give up. And, I often think that maybe I'm just too much of a dreamer and my vision and ambition for the world is it's just not one that's shared by many, many others. But then, you think about everyone that's gone before you and you think about people that have genuinely created change in their livelihoods in their lifetimes, and it just spurns you on to at least give it a go. I mean, there are so many, there's a million people that you can draw upon that have created change, and they're not all well-known names. It's not always your Nelson Mandelas or your Steve Bikos or, your Greta Thunbergs. Change happens by potentially a million small actions coming together to collectively changing things. And I don't want people to feel as if you've got to lead a social movement to change the world, and small actions, when amplified by 1 million people, have the potential to change the world. And, you can't solve a problem from the same consciousness that created it. So, we must learn to see the world from anew. And we have to believe that we can create change within the timeframes that we've got, because otherwise, what's the point, right? So be hopeful, be optimistic. And whether it's a small or a big change that you can make, it does all matter.
Yeah. And I think just on that point, Peter, which is, it's something that I've been thinking about lots over the last few weeks, is that, as businesses, we can come together more on the real big pillars of injustice in society. And I think, sometimes we're too driven by our competitiveness, right? It often came up in Change the Race Ratio. Should the other big four be involved? What would their role be? And, and Richard was great. We were like, yeah, we want everybody involved. Let's not worry about competitors and who's taking the lead. And I think if we could do more of that, we would have a bigger impact in society. It's when we're funneling anything and everything into individualistic purposes, when actually there are probably few things right now where if we all came together in a bigger way, we would make a much bigger impact. So if there's one thing I would like to see change in businesses, is exactly that. Let's pick the big bets that we want to make and let's do it together.
I think you're right. And I think Lizzie said in her opening, actually, that businesses have probably never had so much power. Well, that's absolutely right. Businesses have never had the power that they have today. I don't know which superhero it was, but with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And actually, if the solution doesn't rest with businesses, then actually there probably won't be a solution.
I think this is it's been a fantastic discussion. I promise we're going to close soon, but I think we can go on for hours. But I wanted to just ask you very quickly, looking back at your careers today, is there anything that you're particularly proud of as part of your respective journeys? And what's the kind of main stay awake issue that's keeping you up at night still? I don't know. I don't want to pick on someone to go first, but
that's okay, Peter. I mean, I'm happy to go for it. Shall we do it together?
Well, I was going to say, actually, the thing that creates most discomfort is the kind of stellar introduction that you gave me, and it just makes me feel like, oh, that's not me. That's I am literally just me, and I've got this huge privilege of having the job that I've got now and the opportunity to speak to you brilliant people. I mean, I just feel very privileged and probably very overpromoted. And that's what keeps me awake at night, thinking I'm not worthy to hold this position of responsibility. I genuinely do. I've got no regrets about the mistakes I've made in my career and how little I was paid in the early days of working for small charities in kind of fairly modest roles. We all wish we probably had a little bit more. But actually, what I've gained through this is beyond my wildest dreams and imagination could have ever told me I would get from this. And that is like knowledge, friendships, learning from people that have got far, far less than I have got. I mean, I've got no regrets, only a sense of great privilege and a real kind of modesty when you get such wonderful introductions.
we can edit that out if you like, Peter. That's fine. Yeah.
I don't know if I look back at anything and think I'm proud of it, because I think there is so much to do, right? So I think I'm one of those people who looks and thinks, what else should we be doing? And I think, I guess the one thing I would want people to sustain is inquisitiveness and to continue to challenge, because we have so much to do when it comes to society's inequity and injustices. And we've got nothing to be proud of in a world that is so unequal at the moment. So that would be my view on the world outside of everything we do. We have too much to do to stop.
And I still really want to build a movement. I mean, I know we're talking about starting movements, but, can I go to bed tonight and think I've started a movement? No, I can't. I'm still yet to achieve that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
So that's my ambition for the future.
Well, massive luck to the years ahead. And thank you so much for such inspiring comments today. I think we're about to close it off, so we can't do that without asking the big question of this week's episode, which is, how do you start a movement? Perhaps just in a few words, each of you.
I think for me, I never look at it as a movement because I think that would probably overwhelm me. I think find something that you're really passionate about, take it somewhere, try, to Peter's point, we don't have to be Nelson Mandela's, we make a difference every day in our life, whether that impacts 10 people, 20 people, or a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand, who knows, but give it a go. I think that's the main thing for me.
And Peter?
Gosh, if only I knew, I would have probably done it. I think, do it with good humour, because there's nothing like a lecture in morality to switch people off. So do it with good grace, with good humour, and never assume your position as a leader. Some of the greatest leaders have followed rather than led, and just go forward with that sense of keeping truth in your heart, and be true to yourself and true to what you know, and you can't really go far wrong. And whether or not you create a movement, you can certainly be part of one.
Well, Kalvinder and Peter, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today. It's been a fantastic discussion. I, for one, have personally got an awful lot of advice about how to make a successful conga next time I'm at a wedding. But it's been a brilliant discussion. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own Pod Squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston, and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.